we have them eat? Whole grains, legumes, lentils, vegetables, and fruit. You've all familiar and heard about this. No oil, fish, fowl, meat, or dairy. No oil. No oil. Let's just take a moment here because some people still are not clear about the fact, no oil. Why? Because the data. Olive oil is terribly seductive. Scott Grundy did some studies that are very short term that showed that it increases your good cholesterol, lowers your bad cholesterol, improves your ratio. It got a huge amount of press. Doctors heard about it, and therefore it must be wonderful, right? Wrong. Because you look at longer term studies, Blankenhorn, right in California. 2 groups of patients, one saturated fat, the other monounsaturated like olive oil. The baseline angiogram at the end of the year, the angiogram disease of coronary disease had progressed just as much in each group. Lawrence Riddell in the Research Triangle took the African green monkey, some similar lipid metabolism to man, saturated, unsaturated, 5 years. In the monounsaturated olive oil group, higher HDL, lower LDL, better ratio, autopsy, just as much coronary disease. The oil companies didn't like that, so Lawrence Riddell repeated the study with rodents, and the result, the same. Dr. Vogel has gone on and shown us indeed that olive oil activates clotting factor 7 just as much as butter. And Vogel coronary artery disease really need never exist. And if it does exist, it need never progress. Colin, thank you for those kind remarks. It's so exciting to be partnered with people like Dr. Campbell, who has such incredible credentials, who are so generous with their time and have such belief in their convictions and integrity, which is what we really are seeking today. Now, what you see on this screen, that's the building, which is called the Cryo Building, at the Cleveland Clinic, and my office was on the 8th floor of this hospital. And like all hospitals, the Cleveland Clinic is a cathedral of sickness. Those hospitals shine when you crumble. And we want to change that. Right now, coronary artery disease does not have the top headline. How many people in your community are going to die of West Nile virus this year? But how many are going to succumb to cardiovascular disease? We learned from Framingham that 1 out of every 2 males in the course of their life will be affected by coronary artery disease, 1 out of 3 females, and more recently the data suggests that the females are catching up with the men. This doesn't start out very well. This is a young couch potato. And if you look carefully, you will see that even the relatives on the wall and the fish and the dog, they're not asleep yet. It's always very exciting when you have to speak right after lunch. You kind of are hoping. Now, this is back in the days of Sohio at Cleveland. Sohio was the great gas station which preceded BP, and they just weren't really very public health conscious. Dave Thomas, who was the great founder of Wendy's and had many admirable personal qualities at what he did for orphans, but one of his less admirable qualities was that I never heard in any of his advertisements which he participated in himself, he never described in detail what preceded and what occurred during his quadruple bypass operation. You may remember that when in 1970s, when Burger King wanted to outdo their competition with advertising, they made a thing called the Whopper. And the saying went that it took two hands to handle the Whopper. Whose two hands were handling the Whopper? Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain. Where is Wilt the Stilt Chamberlain today? He's died of heart disease. Now, this is not a disease of the elderly. We know from the data from the Korean battle casualties and the Vietnam casualties that when you look without a microscope at the coronary arteries of these young men, an average age 20 years, even without a microscope, there is gross evidence of coronary disease in 80%. So this is not a disease of the young. But what happens if you say, well, how about the civilian population? Recently, there was a study entitled the PDAE study, the Pathobiologic Determinants of Atherosclerosis in the Young. These persons in this study had died from accidents, homicides, and suicides, and their ages ranged from 16 to 34. The disease of coronary artery disease was ubiquitous. See, it is tough, isn't it? Right after a meal, it's got to get cranked up and listen to coronary disease. So the disease is ubiquitous now. It's frightening what's happening to some of the Puerto Rican population in New York, where they're drinking so much Coca-Cola and having so much of this food that we now know because of their excessive obesity, they have type 2 diabetes in adolescence. And the frightening thing is that they are the first generation that we expect that will not outlive their parents. Nature constantly tries to give us some information about a breakthrough. And when did this great breakthrough in coronary disease begin to come? A little bit in World War I, but especially in World War II, what we found was that when the Axis powers of Germany overran the Low Countries of Holland and Belgium, and when they occupied Norway, they took away all their sheep, goats, cattle, and their livestock. They lost their dairy. And what happened in
I've got a lot to talk about in a fairly short period of time, and as I was thinking about putting these thoughts together and some slides and things like this, I really had a hard time selecting what to put in it to try to cover this sort of this ocean of information, in a sense, that to me is so convincing. It is really so convincing, and my convincing, or my
Kingdom has changed the tire business with ready-to-roll.
Greetings, I'm Raymond Francis, and for those of you who have not seen one of these tapes before, they are based on my book, Never Be Sick Again. There's a model of health that is outlined in Never Be Sick Again that we call the Beyond Health model. This model is simple so that anyone can put it to use in their life